All right, so this is our third week of our study of prophecy leading up to Easter about prophecies of Jesus' ministry, death, and resurrection. So very excited to jump into part 3 with you here. Just in way of review real quick, part 1 was looking at the nature of the Messiah. So who was the Messiah to be in the prophecies? So what was it that they were expecting? And we looked at some details there. And then specifically, what was what prophecies did Jesus fulfill related to his ministry itself, which that was kind of abbreviated because there's a whole lot more you could say there. You're talking about the life of Jesus, right, over a 3-year period. So that was abbreviated, but just to show you that there were prophecies about that, just like there were prophecies about his birth. Last week, we dove real deep into the Day of Atonement and some of in the Passover and some of the festivals that relate to the Messiah, just looking about how Jesus basically fulfilled all of that. Multiple times in his ministry, he talks about fulfilling the law and the prophets and the sacrificial system. So we went way into the depths, into the Day of Atonement and all of the blood and sacrifices and all of that. This week, we are actually going into the laundry list of prophecies that Jesus fulfills. I mean, it's a massive list. I usually end up finding more. I'm like, oh yeah, that one verse, every time I do this, I've done this study a number of times, and there's always more to find. So we've got a lot ahead of us today. We're going to be all over the place in the scriptures. We will frequently be in Zechariah and Psalm chapter 22. There are quite a few prophecies out of those books. So if you want to go to Psalm 22 and kind of bookmark that, and then in Zechariah around chapter 9 might be a good place to just kind of camp out. But we're going to be all over the place in Zechariah and the Psalms and in the New Testament and Isaiah, so be prepared. We'll try to mix it up a little bit as well. In front of you, you should have a worksheet with some blanks on it. Hopefully you got one of those. And there is a section where we're gonna, did you not get one? Okay, do we have some more? Okay, excellent. So there's going to be some opportunities as well for us to try to find prophecies. So, for example, we're going to get into Psalm 22, and we're going to try to find as many prophecies as we can that are in there, because there's an extensive list, all kinds of details within that. But don't worry, I do have the answer key to that. So in case you're like, oh, I don't know if I got all of them or we're going too fast, I do have the full notes available for you. So just in way of trying to make it a little bit interactive, so I'm not just up here spewing words the entire time. All right, so let's take a look at the key events that Jesus fulfills and the prophecies related to that. And the first one happens in the Jerusalem entrance as he comes in on a donkey. So let's camp out in Zechariah 9, verse 9. Zechariah 9, verse 9. And someone who's there, could you read that for us, please?
Rejoice greatly, daughter Zion. Shout, daughter Jerusalem. See, your king comes to you, righteous and victorious, lowly and riding on a donkey, on a colt, the foal of a donkey.
There we go. So there's our passage. Most of the time, we're not going to get into the New Testament passage that's adjacent to that. I'm assuming that you have a little bit of familiarity with some of the story around that, but in case you want to go to the New Testament reference, one of them is listed there. Sometimes there's multiple, as our synoptic gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, oftentimes will have some of the same events where they kind of talk about it sometimes a little bit differently. We're not going to get into that, but Luke is a good passage to go to. Sometimes they'll even tell you, and he did this to fulfill this prophecy. Matthew especially does that. So if you do want to go and look up those passages later, definitely I encourage you to do that. That's a good study. But just we've got so much to go through today. We'll primarily look at the Old Testament ones, which for many people is new. It's like, oh wow, that's actually in there, or that detail's in there, and it's fascinating to see that. Somebody tell me what's significant about a donkey here? Why would this be the prophecy?
That's how Jesus entered Jerusalem.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Wasn't there a tradition of kings coming in on donkeys?
Not on donkeys, though. See, this is weird. On horses.
Okay, that's
Yes.
what it was.
Usually a white war horse. And in fact, if you look in Revelation, That is the picture of Jesus that we see. And I believe that's in Revelation 19 or 20, somewhere in there. You can see him appearing in the clouds. He's on a white war horse. He's dressed as a warrior. But that's not how he appears the first time. He comes in on a donkey. What's that?
He's humble.
He's humble.
on the donkey.
Yeah.
It's a beast of burden, a lowly animal.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And so that's how he's coming this first time. And there's lots of examples of where Jesus is, his first time around is emphasizing the messianic ministry of redemption and forgiveness of sins. And then comes the judgment. Yeah.
I think it really ties back to Isaiah, because in the suffering servant,
Yes.
the donkey is a servant.
Yes.
I think it ties together as a suffering servant.
That's an excellent perspective, because that also ties into one of the things that we talked about in our first week, where they weren't expecting the suffering servant to be the same messianic figure as the one that was going to overthrow Rome. And so for Jesus to be both of them, because they knew, they weren't stupid, right? They knew these prophecies. When the wise men came and said, "Where's the King of the Jews going to be born?" They were like, "Yeah, Bethlehem." They know. But it's like the suffering servant, you're right, that is kind of encapsulated in the picture of the donkey, is weird for the same one that's going to, that in their mind, overthrow Rome, but ultimately he was going to replace all the world's governments eventually, just not right at that moment. So, yeah, enters on a donkey, humble, suffering servant.
Kind of like the day he was teaching the children, they didn't expect that either.
Because children are lowly in this culture. That's absolutely right. He defied their expectations multiple times like that.
Well, he always picks people that no one else would pick. David was short, Saul was tall.
Yeah.
He doesn't pick what we think he should pick.
Exactly. Continues to defy those expectations. I think it's important too, whereas this next one is not a direct prophecy, but it has messianic feelings to it, and it shows people treating him as the Messiah. So I think we should look at that too, and we'll discuss that. So this is Psalm 118, verse 26. But this one I'm actually going to read from Matthew, but if you want to jump over to Psalm 118, verse 26, and then I'll give you the context with Matthew 21 here for this one. This is as he's riding in on the donkey, and the crowds are going ahead of him. They're laying down the palm branches and all of that. And they were shouting, "Hosanna to the Son of David. Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. Hosanna in the highest." And when he entered Jerusalem, all the city was stirred up, saying, "Who is this?" And the crowds were saying, "This is the prophet Jesus from Nazareth in Galilee." And then can someone read Psalm 118:26 for us?
Blessed is the one who comes in the name of the Lord. We bless you from the house of the Lord.
Yeah. So they're quoting from this psalm here. That's they would have many of these memorized. This is their hymn book, so they know these psalms, have them committed to memory, and that's the one that they're choosing to shout. If you're looking for the blank here, it's the crowd's praise. The crowd's praise. And so as they're praising him, and then there's a confrontation with the Pharisees too at one point, especially when the children get involved in some of this praise as well, talking about him as the Son of David, and they try to shut them up. And that's when Jesus says, if you tell them to be quiet, the rocks will cry out. That's kind of the context of this whole thing. And so while this is not a direct prophecy, what they're basically doing is they're taking a song of the Messiah, the Son of David, the King, and by saying Hosanna, they're saying, "Save us, save us." Okay? So they're throwing that messianic title here. And so I think that's important, because a lot of people will say these prophecies of Jesus were conveniently tailored by his disciples later to make it look like he fulfilled them, and nobody believed he was the Messiah at the time. I've heard arguments of that nature before. And to the contrary, and you can find many examples like this, as he's coming in, this is exactly what they believe. They believe he's going to be the Messiah. Okay? So I think that's an important one. They're putting that label on him. Jesus is accepting that praise. Contrast that with people who try to bow down and worship angels, like John does in Revelation, and the angel says, "Don't worship me, worship God." Here's Jesus accepting this worship. He's riding in on the donkey. He's not saying, "What are you all doing? Stop with the palm branches. Stop singing this, I'm not God." He's accepting this.
It had to be bittersweet, though,
Yes.
knowing that they are knowing the next step that's going to happen.
Yeah. And that all of these people will then turn on him the next day. Or,
Yeah.
very soon. Okay, so that's the first one, his Jerusalem entrance. And the second is his betrayal. And this one is fascinating, just how detailed this one is here. So we're going to really break this down and spend a significant amount of time on it. And I encourage you, too, to use your imagination just about, how Jesus feels. Because, though he is God, he's also man and has emotions. And this is such a deeply emotional time. Not only has he set his face towards Jerusalem to fulfill prophecy and to finish his work of redemption, knowing everything that's going to happen, he also has to be betrayed by a friend. And that's our first blank there, betrayed by a friend. Betrayed by a friend. It was actually prophesied. We flip over to Psalm 41, another psalm with some messianic tendencies here. I'm actually going to read a considerable section of this just for context. So Psalm 41 verse 9 is where we'll focus on, but I'm going to start in verse 1. How blessed is he who considers the helpless. The Lord will deliver him in the day of trouble. The Lord will protect him and keep him alive, and he shall be called blessed upon the earth. And do not give him over to the desire of his enemies. The Lord will sustain him on his sick bed. In his illness you restore him to health. As for me, I said, O Lord, be gracious to me, heal my soul, for I have sinned against you. My enemies speak evil against me. When will he die and his name perish? And when he comes to see me, he speaks falsehood. His heart gathers wickedness to himself. When he goes outside, he tells it, and all who hate me whisper together against me. And against me they devise my hurt, saying, a wicked thing is poured out upon him, that when he lies down, he will not rise up again. Even my close friend, in whom I've trusted, who ate my bread, has lifted up his heel against me. But you, O Lord, be gracious to me and raise me up, that I repay them. By this I know that you are pleased with me, because my enemy does not shout in triumph over me. And we could continue there, but I'll stop there. Notice, as we go through this passage, there's some things in there that kind of, you thought, that kind of sounds like Jesus. And there's probably some things in there that you're like, that doesn't sound like Jesus at all. Okay? This is very typical of prophecies. A lot of times, I think we've talked about this term before, where there's kind of a telescopic nature to the prophecies, okay? And so a lot of times, a prophecy, so let's imagine a telescope here, a prophecy is provided, and it has an immediate fulfillment right then. As an example that we looked at before, when Isaiah has the prophecy of the virgin shall conceive and bear a son. Right in that immediate context, there is an unmarried woman who gets married and has a son. Although some scholars debate whether that was a miraculous conception too, but it doesn't seem like it. It seems more natural. So that was an immediate fulfillment. However, when you kind of compare some of the prophecies, it's like, well, that part was fulfilled, but not everything was fulfilled in that one person. And so there seems to be something that's still future about that prophecy. So the telescope then kind of comes out again, and then Jesus fulfills that later. Okay? And the same thing happens. Last week we looked at types, and types are a foreshadow of something to come. So Adam is like Jesus. He's not Jesus. Jesus is called the second Adam, so there's something better about him, but there's something that's similar. We looked at Isaac and how Isaac was a sacrifice, but he didn't die. There was a substitute. And so he's like Jesus. He's not Jesus. So it's a similar kind of thing where Isaac is this only son who's sacrificed but not, and then Jesus fulfills it all the way. No? Oh, okay.
Sorry.
So, no worries. So basically what you have here, the part that's talking about sin and all of that, like this is the psalmist who's talking. He's pouring his heart out. So that's that immediate fulfillment part right here, that this is a real person who is making these cries, but yet there's parts of this that are talking about God's triumph over his enemies, and his enemies conspiring together against him, whispering to him. And if you think about it and go back to the New Testament, how the Pharisees begin to conspire together about when would be a good time to kill Jesus. There are actually some people that decide that they're going to take an oath to, make sure that he dies. Of course, Judas behind the scenes is conspiring. right? So all of that is happening, and so you kind of have this where the enemies are whispering together, verse 7, all who hate me whisper together against me to devise my hurt.
Okay,
And so
now,
they
but
want that.
David's writing this.
You know, I don't remember who the author of this one is. Does it say that? Yes, Psalm of
the
David.
leader, a Psalm of David?
Yep.
So is he writing it as saying, this is what's gonna happen? Or is he writing it about himself?
So David is interesting that way, where he sometimes is writing about both. And Jesus actually points this out with the Pharisees, because David has a psalm that says, the Lord said to my Lord, sit at my right hand. And Jesus says, well, if that's David, then who's my Lord? You know, who's this person that he's talking about? And it's this really interesting grammatical situation where it's like there's someone else he's talking about. And many of these prophecies in the Psalms are about, they're Davidic Psalms. And we actually looked at this in Acts chapter 3, I think it is, if you remember Peter's sermon on the day of Pentecost. And they're like, oh, you guys drunk? You know, the Holy Spirit comes on him. He starts preaching, and he pulls out a Psalm of David and says, look, this psalm says that David is, he's praying to God and saying, you won't let me see decay. And he says, now, hold on a minute. David died. Wait, it would sour the mood, right? He was buried right over there. That's his tomb. You guys know how it works. He's decomposed many hundreds of years ago. He saw decay. So who's he talking about? He's not talking about himself, even though he is. So yes. So you're going to see he's talking about himself, but there's also something else. David is also one of those types of Christ, a man after God's own heart that is representing the Messiah King.
Because that would be one of the things that did happen to David. People did conspire to take
Yes.
his kingship and
Yes.
on him.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And so it's one of those things where it's like, I was telling one of my students who was one time who was really struggling in one of my English classes, and he was saying, I don't understand what we're reading. And I said, the good news is that everybody starts that way when you're reading literature, and the more literature you read, you start to recognize more things, like, oh, I've seen this symbol before, or that's like this. And one author once said, I begin to recognize my good friends that I've known in literature through all the literature that I read. And, oh, there's Romeo and Juliet again in this science fiction novel. And, oh, there's the, you always see the same patterns show up in literature. And the same is true with the scriptures, is, the more you read, you realize, oh, that's a little picture of Jesus right there in David's life. Or, ooh, here's another one right here.
When it says he's a close friend whom you trusted,
Yeah.
and maybe wrong, but I'm thinking he's saying that for people to see it, but I don't think he ever trusted to, because he knew Jesus was going to be.
Yes. True. He knows what's in him.
There's an interesting correlation here that we never talk about, because there's not a lot written about Satan, Lucifer, the morning star, except for the things we do know. He was the leader of the cherubim, and he was basically, in some translations, he's considered the shining one. He was very beautiful.
Yeah.
And if you look at his task or his responsibility, he was really God's right-hand man to lean towards, to take care of things. And if you look at Judas, he was the treasurer.
Yes.
He would go give it to the poor. I don't think we have a really good, I think we want to vilify Judas, but I don't think we can put the words that Jesus automatically distrusted him, because we have proof that he would pray to God that Satan would not take any of them, or that he wouldn't take Peter. He only specifically said, please don't let it be Peter. He didn't know. And when he's at the table and he says, whoever takes this, the person at the right hand just automatically went, I'm first, because they were sitting at the head of the table. I think we do it a disservice the way we just make it so simple, because I don't think it was that simple.
But God knows everything.
But Christ didn't know this at the time.
Well,
It's written. He just prayed it wasn't going to be Peter, and he prayed over all of them because he knew Satan was going to go for one of them. And he didn't want it to be Peter.
Yeah.
It's very hard to accept, but it is.
Yeah, and I think
deeper than we want to give it credit to.
You do bring up a good point. There are some scholars that, there does seem to be some things that Jesus in his humanity doesn't allow himself to know. And so the key example that people go to is only the Father knows when the Son will return again. And so
But it
that's
tells
the
us
key
that in the
example.
Bible,
Right.
right?
Yeah, and so I think it's interesting. I don't know fully about the details of what he did or didn't know in Judas. I know he prays about the son of perdition at one point in reference to Judas. I'd have to go back and study to see some of the details there. But
Well, after he's resurrected, and he's on the beach with Peter, I think is when he gives that speech, like, I prayed over all of them, and I prayed that Lucifer wouldn't, that you would be protected. Not you as the group, you singular to Peter.
and there
is
I
when he
think
admits to this.
I think there he's talking about Peter's denial of him, because that's the context of restoring him
Yes and no.
back.
It,
Okay.
it seems to be clear evidence to me that he prayed over the group about who it would not be, because one would be chosen. I don't think he knew. I don't think he was given that knowledge. It doesn't seem to
Interesting.
be.
Yeah, I do agree with you on the point that he entrusted Judas with things. He entrusted him with the power to heal people. Remember, he sends all of his disciples out, and they're all healing people, including Judas. Have you ever thought of that? So there's that level of trust. And he was in charge of the money, so he did entrust him with that. So there
Well,
definitely
we hear in
is
the
that.
supper that they assumed he was going to give something to the poor.
Yes.
So
Yes.
he was entrusted to give things to the poor.
Yeah, exactly.
John
So,
6:64.
uh-huh.
However, there are some of you who do not believe. And Jesus had known from the beginning which of them did not believe and would betray him.
Thank you. Okay. So
I can't
that
remember what she said.
there's John 6:64.
Want me to read it?
Yeah, go ahead.
But among you there are some who do not believe. For Jesus knew from the first who were the ones that did not believe,
Mhm.
and who was the one that would betray him.
Okay, so he did know. Thank you. Okay.
It's just like,
Yeah.
no one is wholly evil or wholly good,
Right.
completely.
Right.
I mean, drug runners take care of their families,
Mm-hmm.
so there's good aspects of every individual,
Yes.
and God knows that too.
And that's fair because, I think to your point about like simplifying things, we all justify our actions, so it's not, we try to make it not fully evil, but it is
Yes.
sinful. So, yeah, thank you. That solves the issue of did Jesus know? But I want to focus in on that belief part because that's really important for John. John's whole thing is he wants you to believe, but he's also obsessed with talking about people who believe and don't believe. If you look at every single situation, like he even talks about how his brothers and even his mother at one point are not believing in him because they're trying to get him to become powerful and draw a crowd. Later, that turns around. We talked about that with Jude. Jude would have been, among that group who was, wanting something different for Jesus. And you see all these examples of people who are believing in Jesus. And what's really interesting is there's some places where Jesus cannot do miracles because people aren't believing in him, and it says, and he did not entrust himself to them. And so, yes, or another translation is disclose himself. And so he knows who is not believing in him. That's a characteristic of Jesus. And that belief is really fascinating here. So that's one of the things to keep in mind with Judas is Judas's unbelief. So though he's there the entire time, and he's able to, Jesus gave him the power to heal people, and yet he did not believe. And you remember at the day of judgment, some people will come to him and say, Lord, Lord, did we not cast out demons in your name and do all these miraculous signs in your name? Depart from me, I never knew you.
It makes me think of the Pharaoh and all the things they could do until the last
Yeah.
one. Which
Exactly.
when you think about turning the river, and kind of like, how could they do that?
Yeah.
Turning it into blood.
So the point to take away from this one is he's betrayed by a friend. And so, though he knows Judas and he's entrusted Judas with these things, Judas betrays him. He's omniscient. He knows all things, but yet his friend still betrays him. And that's deep. That's a deep wound there. But there's more to it, right? So next, he's sold for 30 pieces of silver, and We're actually going to take a look at Zechariah 11 in here now. So Zechariah 11, and there's quite a bit of information. In fact, you're going to see 7 different things that happen in great detail here in a minute. You'll see under point E a detail review. So I want you to kind of get and emphasize just how many things in this one passage. This is one of our 2 big passages for today. So let's take a look at Zechariah 11. And I'm going to start, maybe, let me see where the context is for this one. Yeah, I'll start in verse 12. Zechariah 11, verse 12.
And I said unto them, if ye think good, give me my price, and if not, forbear. So they weighed with my price 30 pieces.
Yep. So there we go. We've got 30 pieces of silver, or some of your translations will say shekels of silver. Now, the context of this is a completely different context. This is, again, one of those telescoping passages where it's talking about something else. Something else is actually happening during this time, but yet there's so many things that there seems to be some other fulfillment that is happening. And now let's go further here. What happens to that money? So Jesus is sold for 30 pieces of silver, and that money is thrown into God's house. That's line C there. It's thrown into God's house, and you can see that here. Then the Lord said to me, throw it to the potter, that magnificent price at which I was valued by them. So I took the 30 shekels of silver and threw them to the potter in the house of the Lord. In the house of the Lord. Okay? So that's what Judas does in Matthew 27:5. So what happens to that money then after it is thrown there? So this is also in verse 13. So throw it to the potter, that magnificent price at which I value them. So I took the 30 shekels of silver and threw them to the potter in the Lord's house. I may have actually gotten the wrong passage here. I'm going to maybe have to look that one up again, because I thought that there was another prophecy. I'll have to look that one up in a minute. Okay. But if you go to Matthew 27, verse 5, we can see what then happens with that. Oh, I know what it is. Throw it to the potter. Matthew 27, verse 5. Goodness, my mind. Okay. And he threw the pieces of silver into the temple sanctuary and departed and went away and hanged himself. And then the chief priests in verse 6 took the pieces of silver and said, it's not lawful to put them in the temple treasury, since it's the price of blood. And they conferred together with the money and bought the potter's field as a burial place for strangers. And so this is the reason it's been called the field of blood to this day. Okay?
So they took the money that he threw to buy the land where he was buried. Huh.
Yes. Yeah. It's a little vague in this passage of Zechariah 11:13, and I think I skipped a piece that is from the prophet Jeremiah. I'm going to have to look this up, and Matthew quotes from it if you want to write this down in Matthew 27, verse 9. It was spoken through Jeremiah the prophet. This was fulfilled, and they took the 30 pieces of silver, the price of the one whose price had been set by the sons of Israel, and they gave them for the potter's field as the Lord directed me. And so there's kind of 2 different passages there. Yes?
To me, it's the thing of Judas was willing to accept a minuscule amount of reward.
Yeah.
30 shekels was something that could be just thrown to the potter. They were low class. And then that money is then taken to the temple, then, ironically, the potter's field. You know,
Yes.
Judas
Yes.
sold out for almost nothing.
Yes.
And we
Yeah.
think 30 shekels, that sounds like a lot, but it wasn't,
And it's called the field of blood now?
The field of blood. Yep. Yeah, okay, so the money is thrown to the potter, so it's kind of like a metaphorical thing, but we do have the fact that they buy a potter's field, okay? So let's kind of emphasize the details here in part E. So first, he's betrayed, okay? So that's important, that there has to be a betrayal. That's something that was expected. And the betrayal doesn't happen by anybody, but this is a close friend, betrayed by a close friend. And who closer than someone who has walked with him for 3 years, who he's entrusted the money to, right? Who he knows by name, knows his inner thoughts. It's not one of the other disciples that would have been following. He's got 12 close ones, but there are more people that are consistently following him. It's not one of those. It's one from among these 12, a close friend. For 30 pieces of silver, not gold, not bartered, but 30 pieces of silver, exactly. It's in parentheses there if you want to put not gold. I'm getting these mixed up. 30 pieces exactly. Next one is of silver, not gold. Okay? The reason I'm focusing in on this is that sometimes we take prophecy too lightly, I think. And it's like, oh yeah, these were fulfilled. But the specific detail of what was filled there, for 30 pieces exactly, of silver exactly, not gold. And I think this is interesting. It's thrown down, not set, not placed, not gingerly arranged, not organized or stacked.
When we did plays, I don't remember ever having Judas throw the money. That would have been so great.
That'd have been great. I'd like to throw it out to the
Yeah.
crowd.
Put somebody's eye
That
out.
30 seconds.
We stopped before that, I think. We didn't go.
We didn't go the whole way.
You didn't hang Judas on stage?
No, we didn't hang him either, so.
Nobody wanted to be upside down or anything.
There you go.
So
Yep.
that was thrown.
Thrown,
What?
thrown, not set or placed or.
Okay.
It's almost a thing of disgust, you know?
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Yeah, get this away from me. And that's in the attitude of the Pharisees as well. Like, we can't put this money in the.
Right.
Yeah, this is blood money, which is ironic because they used it.
I was going to say, they were the ones who gave it to him.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly. So there they are. It's really fascinating to look at the actions of the Pharisees throughout this time of how they're constantly trying to be clean, but yet they're breaking so many laws the whole time. Everything about Jesus' trial. There's a great article that I read in seminary that was about the illegality of Jesus' trial, and it was looking at the laws. It was written by a lawyer, looking at the laws of their time and of their code, even what's written down in the law of Moses, and how they broke like every single one of them. It's terrible.
That's the same thing that we do too,
Yeah.
right?
It's true.
As we sin, we try to look clean
Yes.
to everybody around.
Yes. That's true. That's true. That's a good connection. It's thrown in the house of the Lord specifically, and then the money is used to buy a potter's field. So there's just kind of
What's
that
a potter?
review.
I mean, like what I'm thinking, a
Pottery.
potter.
Mhm.
Was that a poor person? It was an artist.
So what was the potter's field? Is that where they would just throw broken pottery, or is that
It could
where they
be.
would get the clay to make the pottery?
I'm not
Or-
actually sure. I know both of those can be true because they did have clay fields, and they did have, there's areas that they're still excavating. Actually, some of our copies of the scriptures come from fields where they would throw broken pottery. Those are called potsherds. And then they would take that and they would sometimes learn to write on those. And so you would have passages of scripture that are carved onto those. And then pottery
Like
sometimes
they're clay tablets for the kiddos.
sometimes
or-
like the clay tablets, but so this one is more stable. So a lot of the copies of scriptures we have are these little excerpts from potsherds. And it's fascinating. Also, we find them on dead people. They would have old pages of scripture parchment and stuff. They wouldn't waste those. They would wrap up people in them. And then we find the bodies and we're like, hey, here's Joel. Okay. Okay.
In the book of Acts, he dies a different death than he.
Mm-hmm. You can put those together.
Right. In
No,
the book of Acts?
yeah, Judas. So you can put those together
And
by.
that's why I was wondering how, because he's the one that bought the land in
Uh-huh.
the book of Acts. And in Matthew, it's the priest that bought the land. So
Yeah.
I don't understand what's on.
So the way to put that together is that he's hanging himself over a cliff, and the rope breaks in some way, and then he falls to his death, and then his guts burst out. So there's two, and they're
Yeah, that's
emphasizing it.
nice.
There's a lot of things like that. Like there's actually the colt that Jesus is riding on, but the mother donkey is actually there as well. And I think it's Matthew and Luke talk about different ones. So it's like, well, Jesus likely is riding both of them through the city, taking turns. Paul, did you have something?
Yes. I just, if you can, just Wikipedia, The site referred to these verses is traditionally known as the Valley of Hinnom, which is the source of the potter's clay.
Okay.
After the clay was removed, such a site would be unusable for agriculture, being full of trenches and holes, thus becoming a graveyard for those who did not live there.
Nice. Okay.
The
Ooh, that's
poor artists
interesting.
of that time.
Yeah.
And now, right? Right?
Where in Acts would that be, do you know?
Acts 1:16-20.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I
All
think
right. So.
It's interesting also that Judas, even in his death, so he basically gave the money to buy the field. But
Yes.
because that happened, it actually allowed others that didn't have the ability to now be buried in some form of respectable
Yeah.
situation, because previously they would have just been tossed in probably a mass grave of some sort.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a good point. There's redemption even in this darkest moment. That's neat.
You know, all the cities have a potter's field.
Yeah, I'm sure in different areas, you know, where they have clay and that kind of thing, they have those. I don't know in detail, but that's really cool, Paul, that you brought that detail up. I hadn't thought of that before. Let's move on to his arrest and trial. We're going to go through this one a little bit more quickly, but I passed out to some of you some little pieces of paper asking you to read some verses, so we're going to go kind of rapid fire style through some of these things of the events that happen during his arrest and trial. So can someone read Zechariah 13:7, whoever has that one?
I've got it.
Okay, go ahead.
Awake, O sword, against my shepherd, against the man who is close to me, declares the Lord Almighty. Strike the shepherd, and the sheep will be scattered, and I will turn my hand against the little ones.
Yeah. Interesting, that term little ones, Jesus often talks about when he calls the disciples ye of little faith. What he actually says to them is like, you little faiths, or you little ones without faith is kind of the thing. So I think that's really interesting. And Matthew specifically is the one who calls this out, that when Jesus is arrested, and you know, after Peter tries to attack them and cuts off the ear of one of the servants who's there, and Jesus heals it, then they arrest him and the disciples run. One of the young men who's there, possibly even the Apostle John himself, or potentially Mark, there's a couple of people who debate this, he's just wearing a linen garment and he runs away. Someone grabs his garment, he runs away naked. You know, like they're getting out of there as fast as they can. And Jesus calls himself the shepherd multiple times. So here's this fulfillment where I will strike the shepherd and the sheep will be scattered. All of them abandon him in this moment of need. I think the reference to the sword in Zechariah 13 is really interesting too. Two, I think, of the disciples have swords there, one in addition to Peter. That's another interesting detail. But he's also silent before his accusers. Who had Isaiah 53:7 that can read that for us?
I do.
Thank you.
He was oppressed and he was afflicted, yet he did not open his mouth, like a lamb that is led to the slaughter, and a sheep that before its shears is silent, so he did not open his mouth.
And so there are many times where he does talk during his trial, but there are so many instances where he just doesn't say anything. And it's like they're trying to get an answer out of him, and it's like, you know, he knows what they're doing is unjust, and it's kind of this thing. And then there are a couple of words that he says to Pilate and to Herod, but not what they were expecting.
He doesn't talk to Herod at all.
Does he not talk to Herod?
Word
Okay.
to Herod.
Maybe misspoke there. So wounded and bruised in Isaiah 53:5. Who's got Isaiah 53:5? Okay.
But he was pierced for our transgressions, he was crushed back for our iniquities. The punishment that brought us peace was upon him, and by his wounds we are healed.
And there's a lot of things in there we'll talk about piercing later. Of course, Isaiah 53 is a fantastic passage to just really dig into for a lot of the details of this Passion Week. Another one is Zechariah 13, verse 6. Who has that one? Zechariah 13:6, go ahead.
And one shall say unto him, what are these wounds in thy hand? Then he shall answer, those with which I was wounded in the house of my friends.
Yeah. The Jewish people are his friends, right? Those are his countrymen. What are those wounds in your hand? Ooh, just kind of gives me chills there, right? It's actually prophesied that he'd be smitten and spit upon. Isaiah 50, verse 6. Who's got that one?
I do.
All right.
I offered my back to those who beat me, my cheeks to those who pulled out my beard. I did not hide my face from mocking and spitting.
Yeah. And Micah 5:1. Micah 5:1.
Now gather thyself in troops, O daughter of troops. He hath laid siege against us. They shall smite the judge of Israel with a rod upon the cheek.
Yeah, there you go. And you can see, if you want to go back a little bit later and take a look at some of those New Testament passages in great detail, just like we saw before, all of those being fulfilled. And of course, some are going to be fulfilled in a minute with the crucifixion. Last one here, mocked, Psalm 22, verses 7 and 8. Who's got that one?
All who see me mock me. They hurl insults, shaking their heads. He trusts in the Lord. Let the Lord rescue him. Let him deliver him, since he delights in him.
Now this one, I have to read to you what actually happens in Matthew 27:29. 27:29. Specifically, you can go to 29. There's one of them, but 41 through 43. He saved others, they said, mocking to him. He cannot save himself. He's the King of Israel. Let him come down from the cross and we'll believe in him. He trusts God. Let God rescue him now if he delights in him. So they're quoting directly from that psalm as an insult. That gives me chills. For he said he's the Son of God, right? And even the robbers who were being crucified on either side, verse 44, were also hurling insults at him as well. But let's zoom in to the crucifixion now and look at Psalm 22. And I have 13 blanks for you here. There's at least, potentially more, there's at least 13 different specific prophecies that are in Psalm 22 alone. Okay? So let's see if we can get them. And I do have a handout for you here in a minute so that you can kind of confirm your answers and make sure that you can get these. But there are a lot of them. So let me read this psalm, and then let's see if we can kind of put some of them into the blanks here. Don't worry about the order or any of that. Don't worry about trying to be right. Just try to capture as many details as possible. I just want you to see the magnitude of what's here. So Psalm 22, verse 1. My God, why have you forsaken me? Far from my deliverance are the words of my groaning. O my God, I cry by day, but you do not answer, and by night I have no rest. Yet you are holy. O you who are enthroned above the praises of Israel, in you our fathers trusted. They trusted, and you delivered them. To you they cried out and were delivered. In you they trusted and were not disappointed. But I am a worm and not a man, a reproach of men, despised by the people. All who see me sneer at me. They separate with the lips. They wag their head, saying, Commit yourself to the Lord. Let him deliver him. Let him rescue him, because he delights in him. Yet you are he who brought me forth from the womb. You made me trust when upon my mother's breasts. Upon you I was cast from birth. You have been my God from my mother's womb. Be not far from me, for trouble is near, for there is none to help me. Many bulls have surrounded me. Strong bulls of Bashan have encircled me. They've opened their mouths wide at me as a ravening and roaring lion. I'm poured out like water. All my bones are out of joint. My heart is like wax. It is melted within me. My strength is dried up like a potsherd. Remember the potsherds that we were talking about? Broken and just thrown into a field. And my tongue cleaves to my jaws. You lay me in the dust of death. For dogs have surrounded me. A band of evildoers encompassed me. They pierced my hands and my feet. I can count all my bones. They look. They stare at me. They divide my garments among them, and for my clothing they cast lots. But you, O Lord, be not far off. O you, my help, hasten to my assistance. Deliver my soul from the sword, my only life from the power of the dog. Save me from the lion's mouth, from the horns of the wild oxen. You answer me. I will tell of your name in the assembly. In the midst of the assembly I will praise you. You who fear the Lord, praise him. All you descendants of Jacob, glorify him, and stand in awe of him, all you descendants of Israel. For he was not despised nor abhorred the affliction of the afflicted, nor has he hidden his face from him. But when he cried to him for help, he heard. From you comes my praise in the great assembly. I shall pay my vows before those who fear him. The afflicted will eat and be satisfied, and those who seek the Lord will praise the Lord. Let your heart live forever. All the ends of the earth will remember and turn to the Lord, and all the families of the nations will worship before the Lord. For the kingdom is the Lord, and he rules the nations. All the prosperous of the earth will eat and worship. All those who go down to the dust will bow before him, even he who cannot keep his soul alive. Posterity will serve him. It will be told of the Lord to the coming generation. They will come and declare his righteousness to a people who will be born, that he has performed it. Now, the end of that psalm doesn't deal with the crucifixion, but Jesus' final coming and the restoration of all things. And so you can see, like, this is describing more than the very situation in which it was written. We're going to focus in on, let's see here, verses 1 through about 21, okay? So 1 through 21 in there. There's at least 13 different ones. One that is not included is, oh, no, I did include that one. Whew, okay, good. I almost spilled the beans here. Okay, so how many of them can you find in here? And let's kind of do this together out loud here in our next 8 minutes, see if we can get as many of these as possible. So what do you see?
Forsaken by God.
Yeah, forsaken by God. That forsaken cry from the cross, Jesus quotes from this psalm, so that's a dead giveaway right there. Good. Forsaken cry, that's one of them. What else?
Cast lots for his clothes.
Yeah, they cast lots for his clothes. They cast lots for his clothes.
Where's that?
That is verse 18.
Verse 18? Yep.
Mhm.
Okay.
What was that one?
Verse 18, cast lots for clothes.
Yep.
His bones not broken.
Bones not broken. Yep.
Whoa. I was thinking about that too, but is that because, what is that?
When
they just
normally they would have
speared
broken their legs so they couldn't
Right.
continue to push up to breathe.
But they did not.
But they
do
knew
that.
he was
Okay.
already
He died
dead.
in 6 hours.
Yep.
Okay.
Now, there's another psalm that speaks to the bones not being broken, but this is very similar, his bones being out of joint. This also is the death on a cross pulls your bones out of joints. Okay, so that's part of what that is dealing with. Yep.
Talks about the mocking.
The mocking.
Parting garments.
Yep. Despised by men, parting garments. Okay.
15 talks about his thirst.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And he talks about being from his mother's womb, but not part of a father.
Yeah, that's interesting, right? So there's almost this reference to the fact that, the messianic coming and being born. So there's a lot of messianic tones in here.
Well, he said he honored him when he was, as soon as he was born, so he knew who his father was at birth.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I'm losing it. When they talk forward, we don't hear this.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Back row.
All right.
I don't-
So we have forsaken cry, garments parted and lots cast,
Mocking.
mocking.
Bones not broken.
Specific. There's two of them. So bones not broken is going to be in Psalm 69, but Psalm 22 is bones out of joint. Okay.
Dry
Mocking.
mouth.
Yeah. Dry
Thirst,
mouth.
yeah.
Suffering thirst. Dry mouth.
Mock, we got that. Mother's
I don't have no one to help, but that's a good one actually. That is true. Yeah.
What verse is that?
Mother's womb.
Mother's womb is not on my list, but I think that's a good messianic one. So if you want to kind of add that out to the side, and I did. There's I misspoke. We're going to go to a couple of other psalms to get some of these others. I forgot that not all of these are in Psalm 22, but I have all the references for you in a handout. So apologies for that.
Pour out like water.
Yeah, okay, yeah, it's interesting. Poured out like water, and then, so go to verse 14. I'm poured out like water. My bones are out of joint, but then that next part, my heart is like wax. It is melted within me. Do you remember when they pierced his side
Yes.
and blood and water comes out? Likely caused, I don't remember the technical details of it, but basically his heart is pierced through and kind of, explodes.
Yeah.
There's also a really beautiful picture of blood and water and the work of redemption and the Holy Spirit. I mean, there's a ton, so it's not just doctor stuff here, but there's the spiritual thing. And it says, it confirms that he's dead, but there's also a spiritual connection there. So if you want to write that down and summarize it, his heart is pierced. His heart is pierced. What's that? It'll be on my list, yeah. So if you're like, I'm tired of this, then you can stop writing. That's fine.
Talks about piercing his hands and his feet.
Yes, thank you. Yep, his hands and feet are pierced.
What verse?
Verse 16.
Thank you.
Verse 16.
People
Okay.
stare and gloat over it.
Yep. So he's being stared upon. Yep.
Verse.
Verse 17.
He's hungry between robbers.
Mm-hmm.
Is that in there?
Is that in there?
He's surrounded by evildoers. I think there's some people that point to that. There's some others that I think it's in Zechariah. I'm not sure if I have this on my list or not, but he's counted among the transgressors is what it says, and there's a couple of different fulfillments of that, which is really fascinating. Okay. Now I am going to pass out the handout, and I'll start this over here, and we can just pass these around.
We're very glad you're giving us a hand.
Yes. I thought, I'll try to make this a little bit interactive, so I'm not just listing out all of them. But now we're going to fill in the gaps. You may have around half of those filled. And like I said, I'm sorry for misspeaking, but 22 gets most of them. But we have to go to Isaiah for some of them and a couple of other Psalms as well. So let's just go through these in order here as this comes around. We mentioned his hands and feet are pierced, but there's also intercession for his persecutors, which I think is amazing. You remember how he says, Father, forgive them?
Yes.
And so that detail is in Isaiah, as many things are in Isaiah chapter 53. There's, his whipping is in there, both in the crushed and the stripes that are happening, but his hands and feet are pierced as well in Isaiah 53. But Isaiah 53:12 adds to that, therefore I will allot him a portion with the great. He will divide the booty with the strong, because he poured himself out to death and was numbered. Oh, there's the number one. Numbered with the transgressors, the robbers, and also the fact that he had his disciples bring swords as if they were rebels, and Peter strikes the ear. That's also a fulfillment of this. He's numbered with the transgressors. He asked them if they had them, and they said, we have 2. And he says that is enough.
Oh, okay.
What he means by that is kind of difficult to understand. Like, that's enough, don't bring it. But then Peter's like, let's bring it, dude. Let's protect him, So it's kind of an interesting situation. But the fact is they did bring them, regardless of what he meant. So he's numbered with the transgressions, yet he himself bore the sins of many and interceded for the transgressors. Interceded. Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. Okay? He's rejected. What's that?
Both people on both sides are the robbers.
Yes.
And only
Yes.
one of them wanted him to.
Yeah, one of them believed.
They weren't robbers.
So
They were seditionists.
So it depends on the translation.
The idea of robbery for crucifixion in that days was the usurping or stealing of authority and power.
Oh.
Yeah. Yeah,
You
so
can
so
steal
some
an apple and get yourself thrown out of cross.
yeah. So it's
Hand up for that.
yeah. All right, so then Isaiah 53:3, as you can see on your list, rejected by his people. I think we had shook their heads, Psalm 22, stared upon, Psalm 22, garments parted, Psalm 22, suffering thirst, that's in Psalm 22, and Psalm 69:21. Psalm 69 then has a number of others for us to look at as well. And then I know we're running out of time here, so I'll finish this up, but I really want to show with you some of these verses. This is also the one that talks about zeal for your house has overcome me. They gave me gall for my food, and for my drink they gave me vinegar, because he was suffering thirst, and then gall and vinegar is offered for him, so you got 2 there. Suffering thirst also in Psalm 22. We have the forsaken cry. The forsaken cry is also echoed in Psalm 46, which we're not going to go to. His bones are not broken. That's the passage that Peter quotes from Psalm 34, which I mentioned earlier. I'm not going to go into that one. His bones out of joint is Psalm 22. His heart pierced is Psalm 22. Zechariah 12:10 says they will look on him whom they have pierced. I'm not going to go there, but you can take a look at that one. And then this one is really interesting. Numbered with the transgressors in Isaiah 53:9, then also Isaiah 53 talks about him being buried with the wealthy. So this is fantastic. I love this. So Isaiah 53 verse 9, his grave was assigned with wicked men, yet with a rich man in his death. So what does that mean? As they condemned him to death, they put him between two robbers, wicked people. But then after he had died, his grave was with a rich man.
Mm-hmm.
And remember, that's where they buried him, in a rich man's tomb. So not the poor
So-
tomb that he
I
would
thought
have
we were
had.
supposed to despise rich people.
Oh, no.
Except for when they give us stuff.
No, that's not what he teaches.
So David wrote this psalm. Do you think he knew? I never really thought about it, but do you think he knew it was about the forecoming?
I think that he
Messiah?
knew he was writing something about the Messiah, not necessarily all the time. I don't know how much, but you can certainly, I think you can hear him speculate about that. And there was a promise that was given to him that his descendants would sit on the throne forever. And he seems to know that that's a messianic message, very similar to the message that's given to Abraham. But I can't speak to how often he knew this was a messianic psalm. Okay, we don't have time to go there because I know we're out of time today, but there's two more points that you can take a look at in his resurrection, Psalm 16, verse 10, and Psalm 68, verse 18. Both of those are mentioned in Acts, and so those are predicting his resurrection and ascension. There are quite a few others as well for those that is really fascinating, just about how he's going to be glorified over everything and raised up. So not literally just his ascension into heaven, but also him being raised up on the cross and ascended into heaven, but then coming in the clouds again. So it's more deep than what I have captured here for you, but just to look at all of these prophecies.
Do you think that, in Gethsemane, these would have been things that would have been in Jesus' prayer as he was considering that, the Psalms that he would have known?
Yeah, I definitely think so. And what we haven't mentioned here, when he talks about drinking the cup, let this cup pass from me, that's a symbol that's used all through the New Testament about drinking the cup, the wrath of God. So that's another big prophetic moment. So he's probably also keeping Psalm 22 in mind about the vinegar and gall, which has to do with the bitterness of judgment of sin. And so literally he drank that, but it's also drinking judgment. So yes, I think so.
That would have been the worst part, not the physical judgment.
Yes, yeah. All right, well, so sorry to go over just a little bit. Yes?
Sherry Roberson came by as I was going out to do the attendance. Our class is assigned pancake mix and syrup to bring during the month of April for the food pantry. And I also have a list, and I'll put it up on the front if you want to buy other things like that. I had said Sharon Horn's class was doing it also. They're doing canned fruit.
Okay.
But it's ramping up, people needing food since Harvesters has kind of had to shut down.
How about peanut butter?
They can always use peanut
Harvester
butter.
shut down?
They're not
Just-
taking volunteers right now because most of their food has been shut off by the government commodity program.
Oh.
All right, well, let's go ahead and close down and pray. Sorry for the fast pace today, but lots of stuff to get to. So definitely check it out throughout the week if you have time. Lord God, I thank you so much for your word. Thank you for this class and their dedication to wanting to know you and knowing your truth. And Lord, we just went through a bunch of stuff really, really quickly today. And, my heart is, I want us to apply your word. And so, we wrote down all of these facts and all these cross-references. But Lord, I ask now that you would help us to pull out the applications. And many of them were mentioned today about how even in Judas's death, there was a graves that were offered then for people who couldn't afford them. And, how there's redemption in that and how you know all things. And just the meticulous way that you fulfill prophecy. We saw that in your birth And now we're seeing that in your suffering and death for us. And we thank you for that. Thank you that you're a God of detail, that you are sovereign over all things. And we know that even in our specific circumstances, big or small, you can reach down into those and heal us and help us in a really specific way too. We ask for that, Lord, in your name. Amen.
Do you think it's likely that it's now